Hey guys, this is Locke. In this video, I'm going to do an in-depth analysis on how to tackle the Thunderbolt Dragon. I'm also going to do an introduction to guild raids, like a more thorough one, and talk about some of the mistakes that I made and how you can avoid those mistakes, and how a little planning actually helps you to do this guild raid a lot better. So, um, so basically, I mean, the gist of it is that you can only use a unit and a pet and a formation once. You can't do it. You can't reuse it for the same guild raid season. Each season lasts about a week, basically. So you can use, you have to, if you already commit a team, like for example that I have by mistake, this team, then you have to keep using it for the season. For an entire season, you can repeat this 3 times. I've only used one attempt, so I can do 2 more attempts, but I already committed the formation, the units, and the pet to this, so I can't reuse this. And the reason that I say that I made a mistake is that, for example, Cosette would have been better served at a different place, and instead I should have used somebody with a buff removal skill, and unfortunately now I cannot go back and fix it. And if you see the score that I got, 1381, I can actually get a very similar score using this team, this practice team. And this team is using a blue pet, and it's using Claire, which has significantly less DPS. But I've understood the mechanics now. The first time I did it, I actually was rushed because I wasn't sure if I have to use these attempts like every day or not. So I tried to get the first run in as soon as possible, and I made a lot of mistakes, and that was the score I got. But now I can actually get like a very similar score using a inferior team. So if I'd used the correct team before and use the correct pet and everything, I would have probably got even higher. But mistakes were made. Maybe for the next week I can do better. But so I'm going to talk about it. And I'm actually going to talk about like why I'm using these units and why I'm specifically even using these pets. So I'm going to talk about my item choices, for example. So Karen actually has a good cooldown set. And the reason for that is because I wanted her to keep healing as much as possible, and I also wanted her to keep applying the attack down debuff on the boss as much as possible as well. Because unfortunately, sometimes you aren't able to avoid taking some damage for all of your teammates, including herself. You can kind of mitigate some of the damage, but you will still be getting hit anyway. So you want to be healing as much as possible, and you want to put the attack down debuff as much as possible as well. If you're having a lot of trouble surviving even like 1 or 2 hits with your main tank, in this case it's Karen, then you might consider putting on a defense set instead of a cooldown set. But I found the cooldown set worked a lot better for me, and also I'm using this as well, the time acceleration accessory, and this is where it starts to shine because she's able to get off a lot more healing and a lot more debuffs off quicker with this. If you have a Mirage accessory, it's also very helpful as well because the boss applies a lot of debuffs, and then once it applies a debuff, you remove the debuff, and then you have a few seconds of invulnerability. So it's really good. And the skill cooldown is only 60 seconds. The battle sometimes lasts more than that, so you might actually be able to get 2 uses of this. So it's a really nice accessory if you have it for this raid. And now my other choices. So you have to bring Henry. You really, really want to if you have him because he provides shock resistance, and this boss does cast a lot of shock. So you want to avoid it as much as possible. And since you're using him for the shock resistance, you really want to bring skill upset on him. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I could have probably used better accessories, but I didn't want to change it too much from my arena team, or else it'll be a headache to fix it. So you can probably use better accessories, maybe more defensive ones or more attacking ones, whichever you need. But this is what I used. The accessory isn't too bad as well. Still, actually, it still gives you all status effect resistances, so it at least helps him to not get debuffed too much, because if he does, he might die, and then everyone else might die. So the team, the setup that I'm using is not too bad, but it still could be better. Also, I should make a mention of Karen versus Shay. So because you can only use one unit once, and you have 3 of these three of these guild raids to take on, you basically have to decide where you're going to use Karen, where you're going to use Shay, and where you're going to use Serena. If you're going to use a different healer, I don't know where my Serena is. There she is. So if you're going to use a different healer instead of these 3, you can make the choice as well, but you really have to only use one at one point. Like you can't use Karen multiple times, obviously. Now, is it better to use Karen or Shay here? I'm not exactly sure. I really liked using Karen here, and I already used her, when I did the challenge, so I was already stuck anyway. But she did really well. Like, even with this team, like I thought she did pretty good for using her here. I've seen other JP players talk about this, and they instead are using Shay here, and they're using Karen on the chaotic land one where it causes fear. Maybe that's better. I'm not sure. But this is what I have, and I feel like this is a pretty good setup. You can try. I mean, you have a practice run. You can try with that and see if it's better for you. But this is the setup I have, and it's working quite well. So I'm probably gonna keep using it. Um, and then if you look at the description of this boss, he actually does he does a lot of AoEs, and his AoE is centered that closer to him he does more damage, and further away from him he does less damage. You can actually see whenever he does an AoE, there's two different colors. Like there's a brighter orange and a less brighter orange. For the brighter orange parts, the units that are taking a lot more damage than units farther away. That's the reason why long range units are recommended to bring. As you can see, all 4 units that I'm bringing are long range. If you're bringing melee units, you're going to have a harder time. It's still doable if you are careful, but there will be AoE attacks that you can't avoid, and whenever they take damage from that, they will die. Or it's going to be easier for them to die because they will take increased damage from that. So because of that, I want to bring, range units, and the best range debuffer that I have is Chris. So that's why I want to bring Chris, and if I'm bringing Chris, I'm going to have increased crit rate for the team. So if I look at the item choices that I have, I will talk about why I brought Claire in a second, but just look at the item choices, right? I have an attack set on Claire and a crit set on Chris. Usually I would want to bring a crit set on on my main DPS unit, but the reason that I brought an attack set is because the entire formation that I have has a lot of crit built in. First of all, I'm using Chris, which is going to increase my crit rate by around 20%. I'm using a crit formation, which increases the crit rate of my DPS by an additional 10%. I'm using Ming. Again, I'm using Ming because I want to really bring out the crit rate on this team, because I want them to crit very often. I can only bring a pet once anyway. I mean, I would rather bring a red pet right now, but because I want to make it more accessible for the people watching this to follow. Like if I'm like, oh, you have to bring the red Eileen pet, and if you don't have it, then what are you going to do, right? So I want to make this as accessible as possible. But if you don't have Ming, use what you have. I'm not actually sure what I would recommend. Just practice with like the other formations as well, and see which one you like best here. But because you're bringing Chris, I think a pet that increases your crit rate would go well here. So anyway, so that's why I for my main DPS, I have the attack set instead of the crit set, because this is probably going to be, if I put a crit rate set on her, it's probably going to be even more than 100% crit rate. She naturally has 25% crit built in, and then 20% from this, 10% from the 10% from the formation, and then another 13% from the pet. Anyway, it's pretty high, and I'm comfortable with it at this level. So that's why I put that set on Claire. Now, why am I bringing Claire instead of like Cosette? Because the boss actually does a buff that you can remove, and that buff increases his attack by 30%. So if he has that buff on, he's going to damage your team a lot faster and kill them a lot faster, basically. So you really want to bring a buff remover on your team, and Claire's the best at it, obviously, but if you don't have Claire, you have to think about who else you can bring. You might be able to get away with using the green Claire, but you have to be careful that she doesn't get damaged, because if she does get damaged, she's gonna, your team is going to lose fast, because she has a lot less health pool than this Claire, and she will also do less damage. And if you're bringing a team like this, like that's your only DPS choice, so green Claire will be your main DPS, so you wouldn't get as much damage, but you don't really have much other choices. Like if you're bringing other buff removers like Spike or something, Spike actually doesn't even wait for the boss to cast a buff before he uses that skill, so that skill is probably going to be wasted. And then if you're manually Spike to do this, again, he is going to be closer to the boss, so he's going to get damage more often, and he might die. So Claire and green Claire is really like one of the better buff removers to bring for the stage. But if you don't have them, then you have to use what you have, right? I don't really know what else to tell you there. Like you have to kind of probably have to figure out how to use green Claire for this if you don't have if you don't have Claire or Yeah, I can't really think of anything. Like even like Ming or something probably wouldn't do well in the stage, and she will also be doing AOE damage, and it doesn't really matter. So anyway, I mean Claire is pretty much the best for the stage, and I didn't even use Claire in my attempt. So, uh, I'm going to talk a little bit about the boss's patterns, and then I'm going to actually show you the fight. I've already pre-recorded the fight because I'm really bad at multitasking and talking while I'm fighting. So I've already recorded it. I'm going to say my comments on top of that. But I'm just going to give you some general outlines first. So the general strategy is to keep your tank away from the rest of your team. If possible, you actually want to keep your team right behind the boss and your tank in front of it. Now, when the boss is attacking, your tank, which should be a ranged unit, you want to keep her a little bit away from the boss so she doesn't take the close ranged damage, which is a lot more than the long range damage. The long range damage is significantly less, so she's able to tank those a lot better. And since she's away from the rest of the team, these attacks that the boss does is usually targeted in one direction. So only your tank, in this case Karen, will be taking that damage. Everyone else is freely able to DPS. But you have to pay attention because there are some patterns that the boss does where you have to quickly move the rest of your team. So you have to keep switching between all target and solo target for your like your party select ability. Like you have to keep toggling it on and off and switching as needed to make sure you're avoiding the skill shots. He also does like a targeted one range directional hit, and when he does that, you want to move everybody away from that and then stay there in place until the boss approaches you. If you don't do that, you might actually get stuck and be in a corner, and then he spawns a lot of AoEs around you and you're not able to run out of the way to you might get stuck and you might die there. So when he does that and he runs away from you, he runs to the corner, make sure you kind of stand still and wait for him to come to you, and then regroup and do the same formation as before. So that's just a very gist of how this is going, like the strategy, and then I'm going to actually showcase it and keep explaining it as you see the playback of what I just did. So here I'm going to explain what I did in this run. Just a quick note on masteries. I'm basically using the mastery that I use for raids, which is I put all the attack stats I can, and I put the status resistances. That's the mastery setup. So anyway, basically I'm quickly moving Karen out of the way. And then you can see that whenever he does an AoE, there's a small concentration that's more brighter red. He takes more damage there. Sorry, he does more damage there than further away. I should have moved Karen a little bit back further. Now here's the first pattern that he does. He does this butterfly kind of thing, and then as soon as he does that, move everybody closer to you because he's going to attack right behind him. So that's the first pattern you have to pay attention to. And then again, you get back into formation, have Karen go right behind him, and then here is his like targeted attack that he does in one direction. As soon as he does that, make sure that you move back to where you are and you wait for him, in that spot for him to come to you, and then you go back and get into the formation again, and then you keep attacking. And then, you basically just do the same thing, right? And he's doing that butterfly formation again. It's sometimes really hard to actually notice if he's doing it or not because, the screen is so hard. So, if you're not able to see it properly, you can't really do anything about it, right? You have to kind of guess and see if he's doing it or not. Now here I had to quickly switch my units because a Karen got knocked down or something, so everyone else is going to stand still. Even if I put the all select, since she's knocked down, they're not going to follow her. So I had to switch to a different unit and then move them, and I still got like 2 people caught in it. Eventually, I find that this stage is actually, it becomes chaotic because there's so many AoEs everywhere. Again, the butterfly effect. And now since they've already taken the damage, I basically keep them standing still because there's no point for them to run anymore. Might as well just stand there and take damage. And I couldn't even move them behind him anyway because the stage is just so quite chaotic. And once it gets to tier 5, I find that the boss is just going to kill me. So it's really hard to survive past tier 5, I feel. So at that point, I've just given up and I'm just like doing as much damage as possible. I actually get interrupted by a call, so but you can see I do about 1,300 damage before I get interrupted and I die. But that's basically it. This is how I my tips and tricks and everything I've learned from doing this. I will do the other raids tutorials as well when I figure out a strategy for them. But I don't want to wait and then make one big video for all of it, so I've just put it out like this. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have other questions or comments, leave them down below, and I will see you guys next time. Take care now.